Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Martin Willis with Podcast UFO, and just a couple of announcements. This is another pre-recorded show. I'm traveling, and so this will come out. It's also going to be for people that like to watch YouTube. It will be video on YouTube. You can watch it there. And just a quick announcement on September 18th, I am actually going to head up to New Brunswick and go to Stan Friedman's home, and I'm going to do basically a retirement show. He's retiring. We know he's retiring. We don't know exactly when he's retiring. But what I would like to do is I'd like to invite the podcast listeners that normally listen to the show to actually watch that live. It's going to be, again, on September 18th at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'll be right there with Stan at his home and invite people to call in and wish him, a happy retirement. And he's done an awful lot for this field, and we will certainly miss him. He's a great guy. I think he's been on the show something like 10 times, something like that. And so I wanted to make sure that I did the last show with him the right way. And he agreed that I could actually come to his house and set up and video and record him. It'll also be a podcast as usual. And I do want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. And anyone can do that. And all you have to do is go to podcastufo.com, and that information is right there. And that is going to be it for me. Alejandro is not doing news, of course, because this is a pre-recorded show, but he will be back. I'm going to try to get him on the September 4th when I'm going to be in Vienna, Austria. I know that Jeremy Corbell will be on that show for an hour, and then hopefully the second hour will be a UFO enthusiast, Eduardo, who lives in Vienna. He's going to be visiting, and hopefully he'll be on the show. And we don't know what we're going to come up with, but it should be interesting to say the least. We'll talk about UFOs in Austria and stuff like that. So my guest tonight is Grant Cameron. He's been a repeat guest. He's always very fascinating. I got to meet him a few years ago in the great state of Maine. And anyway, excited to talk to him about a book that he published, but also some research that he's doing now. We were talking briefly ahead of the show, and it sounds very interesting what he's up to, and we'll get to that. And welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Martin. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think it's been a few years since you've been on.
Yeah,
Maybe even longer by now. Time flies, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So I just see in the background on YouTube, for those watching on YouTube, is that a UFO I'm looking at behind you?
yeah, yeah. Little abduction thing. Someone gave it to me, so
Oh,
I
and
have
it's a painting.
it's a painting. Well, it's a painting, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's nice.
it's kind of
Yeah.
a cool little thing. So
Yeah, right. And you are in Canada, and a lot of people know you from the White House UFO that you worked on for a long time, going all the way back to, Bill and Hillary Clinton and
yeah,
their kind of involvement. I'd like to talk a little bit about that, but for the person who most people know who you are, but real quickly, can you go into your background? I know you had a sighting. We're going to talk about that, but kind of go into your background if you would, real quickly.
okay, yeah, sure. For a lot of researchers, the way it started with me. This is May. This actually starts in February of 1975. A small town by the name of Carmen, Manitoba, Canada, just north of the U.S. border, starts having sightings. The U.S. has just put in the only anti-ballistic missile unit that ever goes operational with 100 new nuclear missiles. And suddenly on our side of the border, we start getting these UFO sightings. And I tell my friends, instead of driving around the city, which we used to do as young kids, let's go see what they're looking at. We say, okay, we're going to go. We don't go. We don't go for 3 months. And then this bizarre incident occurs where a TV studio is trying to film. There's a bunch of TV people out there trying to film from different networks. And they basically catch this thing, which I think was basically planned when I look back 35 years later. They catch this thing jumping off the ground, and they film this thing. It goes viral. NBC picks it up. And it's at that point where I say to my friends, come on, let's go look what they're looking at. I have no interest. I have interest in near-death experiences, near-death studies, I guess. which I still have, and I'm actually working on right now. And I was into Edgar Casey sightings, but I was never into UFOs. Could never have thought about extraterrestrials or anything. And so we go out. We're there for an hour. We drive in this town of Carmen, out, in, out, in, out. And my friend says, "Okay, we'll go back in town one more time. If we don't see anything, let's go home." I said, "Fantastic," because it's a total waste of time. And as we turn to go back in, the object appears from the left to the right. It's down low. It's bobbing up and down. And nobody in the car said, because we had been for an hour, we're going like, "Is that what they were looking at, stars and planets?" And is that what they're looking at? Is that what? And nobody knew what they're looking at, what everybody was describing. When we saw it, everybody just said, "There it is." Everybody instinctively knew. There was no doubt. This is what everybody was talking about. It was just so bizarre. And so I sort of fell off the edge of the earth. 2 nights later, I drag all my friends out there, and they all take off after an hour. And when it comes the second night, it's coming right at us the second night, directly at us. And at that point, I was sort of thinking to myself, "This is a big story, and why is nobody doing this story? Why is nobody researching this thing?" Because the rumor was that half the town had seen this thing. So I started going around. I started interviewing people in the town, and I put together this manuscript. And this guy, I guess about a year and a half later, I tried to get this manuscript published, and nobody will touch this thing. And it was a big story. And the local publisher here, who should have done the story, said to me, "Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers." And I was horrified. I go, "Wow, it's like, this is the biggest story." I interviewed all these people and all these bizarre stories in this town, and she wasn't interested at all. And so from that point, I've never really done sightings, haven't been interested at all. All I've been interested in is the second night when this thing was flying by. I was looking at it, and I've actually just done a paper on this. I was watching this thing fly away the second night, and I'm going, that could be from another planet. I was just sort of awestruck by this thing. And there's people yelling and screaming, and people, some guy taking photographs and stuff. And I'm just watching this thing fly away into the north. I'm thinking, what are they doing? It's like they weren't doing anything. They were just flying along. It was just bizarre. And I, to this day, I've always been interested in the whole thing of, somebody must know what's going on here. Somebody must know what I saw. Somebody must know what this phenomena is and why they're here. And that's all I've been interested in. So I went through this thing, and I chased the Canadian government, and they were very active from 1950 to 54. I put the manuscript on the shelf. I actually gave it to my sister, and it was actually gone for 25 years. My sister's sort of like I wouldn't call her a hoarder, but she's like the family historian. And she kept this manuscript for, I would say, 30 years. And then she brought the manuscript back and said, "Remember you gave me this thing?" And I didn't even remember. I remember writing a couple of chapters. I don't remember writing the whole manuscript. And
Wow.
so I went after the Canadian government. And if you know the Canadian government story, the Canadian government was linked into Vannevar Bush and the defense people and in the United States. So we tracked down through them all the different U.S. officials that we believe the Canadians were dealing with. And that led to Dr. Eric Walker at Penn State University. We chased him around. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees, was chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, the top military think tank in the United States, co-developer of the homing torpedo, 15 years president of Penn State University's big Ivy League engineering college. And he knew what was going on, but he didn't want to talk about it. He was classified. He said, "I can't talk about this." Bugged him for 8 years. I had a team of people that I never really interact with people. I always have this joke that I stay one step removed from my victim. So I had a bunch of people who said, "Oh, I can get him to talk," and I would give them the phone number. And so a bunch of researchers from around the world were talking to Walker, and I was just basically recording what everybody was getting. And after 8 years, he said, "Okay, that's enough of this. Let's just publish it." And we published the thing. And he kept talking even after we published. It was kind of weird. And that's what led to the president, because after Walker died, I believe he died in 94 or something, I went to the Truman Library, because Walker had said that he was going to leave some files he was the basically Assistant Secretary of Defense when he was invited to a series of briefings at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base dealing with the crash, recovery, and alien bodies. And he admitted he was there, really didn't want to talk about it, but this is when he was this Assistant Secretary of Defense for period of 1 year, and he said he was going to leave those files at the Truman Library. So I went to the Truman Library to find those files, what Walker had left there, and the files weren't there. They had a few files on Walker, but the files we were looking for weren't there. And it was at that point where I said, "Man, the president's the most powerful guy in the world. I mean, he's got to know what's going on." So that's when I asked the archivist. I said, "Well, so what do you got on UFOs?" and they had a bunch of, if you remember back in '52, there was the overflight of the Capitol,
Yeah.
and a bunch of people sent in telegrams to the president. Don't shoot him down, Mr. President. Don't shoot him down. And then a week later, the thing flew over again. So they had all those telegrams, but really didn't have that much. And I'm going, this is kind of weird. And that was in Independence, Missouri. And the Eisenhower Library is just down the road. It's maybe 2 hours down the road in Abilene, Kansas. So I said, well, I'll go to the Eisenhower Library. It's pretty close. I'll go down there and I'll see what's going on there. And there was that point where at the Eisenhower Library, it's very sort of formal. All the archivists walk around in suits and stuff. It's like really, really formal. And you have to do an interview to get to research there. So I went there, and they wanted to know what I was going to research and all this sort of stuff. And they had actually done, before I got there, I'd sent in this request to research. And at that point, they had five documents. And one was the famous CIA Robertson panel report, which is not, it was authorized under Truman, but it wasn't finished until Eisenhower, so it's in the Eisenhower Library. So that document is there. But other than that, they only had 5 documents. And so I said, well, how many pages of files have you got? And he said, 28 million pages. And I went, something's wrong here. I've got five documents and there's 28 million pages, because to me it was such an important subject. So that's what led me on this track for, I guess I worked on it 25 years. I chased all the presidents. I tried to find out which ones that had sightings. I went to almost all the presidential libraries looking for documents and stuff. And I found a couple of interesting things, but there really wasn't much there. And then to finish the history of what happened to me, in 2012, I'm watching this lecture by Colin Andrews at UFO Congress. Don't want to be in the room, not really interested in crop circles, only go because Colin Andrews is a major figure. And that's when I have this download experience where I just, boom, all this stuff comes into my head and basically answers the question that I had in 1975. What is going on? What is this all about? And it was this whole idea, it's non-local consciousness. Well, first I thought it was consciousness. Then I realized it was non-local consciousness, almost like you had Jan Hartson on the other week. And that was one of the things that popped into my head, was the conversation between Ben Rich and Jan Hartson, where he said, how do they get here? How does the propulsion system work? And Ben Rich turns around and says exactly what Walker had said to us 2 years before. Exactly the same thing. He said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And so Walker had asked it in 91. Then Ben Rich had asked Jan Hartson it in 1993. And when this all came into my head, this is it. It's this non-local consciousness thing came with absolute certainty. And then I just shifted my focus from there into trying to deal with the people who are interacting with the phenomena. So I deal a lot with experiencers. I deal a lot of, I've tracked down, I guess, about 50 people who've flown the craft. How do you fly the craft? And they're all saying the same thing. And it's this consciousness aspect, which I maintain now is the answer, and that unless you go down that road to conclude this whole thing, you will never solve the problem. That is the problem. And you're starting to hear Tom DeLonge talks about this. John Alexander's just written a book on consciousness, the connection of consciousness. If you look at the whole ATIP thing, it started at Skinwalker Ranch. It didn't start with UFOs. It started with the paranormal, the portal stuff. And so I've been chasing around Ron Pandolfi, the head CIA guy, the operational guy, and he's been putting this portal thing out for 2 years, and nothing is traceable. He looks like he's the Mad Hatter. He's just like crazy stuff, but he keeps talking about this portal. Now John's talking about the portal. Now you hear that the like Put Off and these guys are talking about these wormholes, the portal, and that's the whole thing. It's this whole idea of consciousness, that if portals are real, the nuts and bolts idea of the universe is in a lot of trouble. It's not nuts and bolts the way we think it is, and most people, that's what they think. It's like land on the White House lawn, give us the toys, and then get the heck out of here. And it's much more complex than that. And maybe this is, in the end, maybe why Vallée took off, because Vallée is the guy that started this whole thing, Jacques Vallée. This whole thing that I would be very surprised if this turns out to be extraterrestrials. And that's my opinion now. And I used to think Vallée was crazy, but it was the old thing about knowing and believing. So before 2012, I had a lot of beliefs. But when you have a download experience like that, where it comes with absolute certainty, then you know. It's sort of like, it doesn't really matter what people say. It's almost like when I saw the UFO. It's like I was never interested in sightings anymore, because I know this was not a light in the sky. This was in fairly close, and I had 5 fairly close observations in 75 and 76. So it's that difference between knowing That people think, well, I believe you saw something else. Well, no, I was there. You're the one that believes. I'm the one that knows. If there is such a thing as knowing, the people who are having the experiences. So I spend a lot of time with experiencers. What are they saying? What are they being told? What are the 42% that are getting downloads? What are they being told in these downloads? 40% say they've got they at one point had the answer to everything in the universe, and trying to tap into that whole thing to solve the mystery.
Can you,
Can you,
oh,
oh,
do you mind
do you
just
mind
taking a
just taking
second?
a second?
I'll edit
I'll
this out
edit
of
this
the
out of the
audio.
audio.
Can you
Can
turn
you
down
turn
the
down the
volume in your
volume in your
speakers just a little
speakers just
bit?
a little bit?
Because we're getting
Because
a
we're
little
getting a little
feedback.
feedback.
Um,
Um,
okay.
Okay,
okay.
is that better?
I
I
still hear
still
a little, yeah, that is better. So, can you explain? I heard you talk about this download thing before. Actually, I think a few years ago. Can you explain exactly? You said you're at the UFO Congress. Can is that when that happened? And can you explain how that happened and what the experience was like?
Well, what it happens, it's like when you zone out, when you daydream. And I actually have a theory that I've developed, an analogy, which I think is pretty close to what actually happens. And this gets into, I wrote a whole book on downloads in music, Nobel Prizes, art, um, savants, hypnosis, near-death experiences, all this, and I think it's all the same thing. And the theory goes like this. This is the way I explain it, the analogy. There is only light in the universe. There is no darkness. Darkness is not a thing unto itself. All there is light, and the farther you get away from the light, the darker it gets. So we as human beings live on the bottom of the ocean in almost total darkness. And we think this is what our reality is. We're sort of running around in the dark and we think this is what it is. And from time to time, like when I zoned out, because I didn't want to be in this Colin Andrews lecture. I was thinking about going across the river to Bullhead City, to go to the library. I was thinking about going for lunch. I had no interest in the thing. And that's the whole thing, is it's the ability to dissociate, to shut down your left brain, which is my analogy. And when I went to Hal Puthoff, I asked him about remote viewing. I went to Hal Puthoff. I said, Hal, I think it's got to do with left brain, right brain. If you can shut down the left brain, the rational analytical brain, then you can pop into this thing, into this sort of a higher level. And I said, did you ever think about this with remote viewing? And he just said, he wrote back and he wrote, read chapter 6. So I go to his book, and that's chapter 6 is the left brain thing. So in 72, they'd already figured this thing out with Hal Puthoff and with Russell Targ. And whereas if you look at Eben Alexander, who had the near-death experience, a neurologist, he says it's a neurocortex, the new brain, the ego brain, the rational analytical. If you can shut down the neurocortex, then you pop out. So what I say is you're in this darkness, and then like with me with daydreaming, or with people with meditation, hypnosis, drugs, psychedelics, drumming, pain, there's all these different methods where you can sort of rise up into the ocean and you go into closer to the light where you can see more. So you're not in the darkness anymore, and suddenly you pick up, like musicians will pick up these songs, and the song comes complete, and then they, or like for example, I'll give you a quick list of inventions: the scientific method, the alternating motor, the periodic table, the quantum atom, theory of relativity, laser, hologram, all came with these instantaneous sort of boom, either in a dream or in an instantaneous thing where you're in this lighter thing, you're higher towards the light, you can see more. Suddenly you get the impression of what's going on, how does it fit together. You go back down into the darkness, and then you present your thing. I had this dream last night, I had this song, I had this invention come into my head. And so that's the way I sort of look at it. It's the ability to shut down the ego brain, which creates sort of a veil, or almost like with the psychedelics in the 50s, Hewlett Packard was using LSD with their engineers for creativity. And it's the whole idea is that if you can shut down this the neurocortex, or whatever his thing is that's blocking it, creating the veil, you can break through the veil, you can pick this stuff up. So, and experiencers will talk about this. When you get 42% of all experiencers say that, they have mathematical, technical, or scientific material in their head that they did not learn in school. And for me, it's like a no-brainer. Why would you not talk to these people? Whatever you think, give them lie detectors, whatever you got to do, but to not talk to people who are claiming to be tapped into this thing. Because I know from my own experience, and probably I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't had my own experience, or if I hadn't done these researches on Nobel Prizes and art and songs and stuff. I know this stuff happens, and I think that's what they're doing. They're being sort of drawn up, and it's almost like the idea that whatever this phenomenon is, whatever this intelligence is, it's almost like it's in the higher, closer to the light, and we're maybe ghosts and spirits and all this kind of stuff. Almost like if you ever heard the Bashar, the channeler, the famous alien channeler guy. At one point, he has the expression, "We come to you in your dreams because now you're in our world." And a lot of experiencers will tell me, "Oh, I was not abducted. They just come to me in my dreams." And so it's this whole idea. It's the disassociation, being pulled out of your sort of logical, analytical world in this world where you tap into this and then move back down. So that's basically the way I describe what's going on.
Wow. I remember speaking with Jack Weiner, Jim Weiner from
Yeah,
the Allagash abduction. And he was telling me about his brother Jack, one of the people supposedly abducted, became absolutely brilliant in math. Did you ever hear that part?
yeah. Well, all four of them were affected. They had
Yes,
the art. Their art changed.
that's right.
It was the same thing. It was like they were. It was almost like something changed during that period, and a lot of experiencers will describe this. I mean, there's the one that's probably the most famous. Her name is Kumar. She's a she's a double savant. She's a savant in poetry and a savant in art. She's the one that painted this famous picture of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane at 8 years old, and it's worth like whatever, just unbelievable painting. And she describes this experience at 5 years old where she actually disappears, where they actually bring the police in and they're looking at her for dogs and stuff like that. She disappears, and she describes to her mother that she was taken by Jesus and she was thrown this 1,000 different images that she's now starting to paint. And she's about 22, and she's painted these unbelievable things. I talked to a woman who contacted me at Eureka Springs twice. She said that was an abduction. I will guarantee you. I talked to the kid. I talked to her brother. They described what was going on, and they describe it as this Jesus experience. And 2 years in a row, she came to me. Said I was here last year, and then I said to her this year, I said, "Well, how do you know this? I mean, how do you know? Were you the babysitter or what?" And she said, "No, they had this book that they were studying. The name escapes me, but it was sort of a channeled book that they had a study group, and that's how she knew this. And she had talked to the kids, and she said it had this connection. This is where this girl was getting these images. And when you look at her painting, I mean, it's just unbelievable. There's
Yeah,
like nobody can paint like this girl.
I know. I've seen her work, and I'm an art appraiser, so I kind of, you know,
Yeah,
it is fabulous and incredible that she could paint, especially starting out so young. Those type of people always baffle me. One of the things you talked about, I think you said you were talking about the alternator or alternating current, maybe. Was that? I know
Tesla.
that Tesla mentioned that he just sort of had a vision on how that would work and
Yeah,
scratched it out on a
he was walking in the park
sand
in
or something.
Budapest with the guy, and he draws it in the sand.
Yeah.
He suddenly gets it and he draws it in the sand. Yeah, that was Tesla. So and a lot of these guys, and that's what it is. It's like we sort of think that these guys have high IQs, and it's really not high IQs. It's the ability to run this material. That's what I'd done, because none of the stuff that appeared in my head was stuff that I had learned. It was nothing new. Nothing was completely unknown. It was all material that I had. It was like somebody had taken three pieces of a puzzle and put them together instantaneously like that, and suddenly you went, oh, and suddenly it all made sense.
Like an
And the
epiphany of
weirdest
some
thing
kind?
was, what's that?
I'm sorry, like an epiphany?
Yeah, but the key thing was, and it's so hard. I say to people, the hardest thing to describe to people is the absolute certainty. And if you listen to people who talk about downloads, they'll talk about this absolute certainty. You don't have to check this. You don't have to analyze it. Doesn't matter what anybody says. This is how it works. I absolutely knew this is how it worked. And it did turn out to be true. The things started. It was almost like I had glasses on. I could read the signs after that. Everything started to make sense once I had that. But it was this bizarre, absolute certainty. I walked around for 2 days. I was just like in a daze. It was just like I was just amazed how this had come together. And that's when I started to look. And so when I started looking at the phenomena, that's when I discovered that yesterday one of the biggest produced songs of the 20th century was Paul McCartney, and it came in a dream. And then I realized, oh, there's something to this. And I started looking, and the more I looked, the more I realized that this is not unusual, that people who are creative, and that's why musicians are all right brain creative people. So if you look at Roger Lear, who did the implant stuff,
Yeah.
the 17 alien implants, Roger Lear was asked, what's common between all abductees that you've done with the implants. He said, number one, they're all right brain creative people. And number two, all implants are on the left side of the body. And I went around asking different abductee researchers, is that true? All the implants are on the left side? And if that's true, and there does seem to be a pattern, then the beings are not interested in your left rational analytical brain, because the left side of your body is run by your right brain. It's completely flipped over.
Yeah.
So if they're putting the implants on the left side of the body, they're affecting the right brain, which is the same one as the inspiration. It's the same one that artists use. And it's this idea that if you shut down the left brain, the rational analytical brain, you zone out whatever you're using, and the right brain can sort of tap into whatever this field is, pull the material into this dark world that we live in.
Amazing. We're coming right up on the break here in just a minute. So I do want to talk a little bit more about the red star, because I want to talk about what type of, what went on with that as far as the research. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll get into some other things, of course. So you're listening to KGRA Radio. My guest is Grant Cameron, and we'll be right back right after these messages. All right, and welcome back. This is Martin Willis with Podcast UFO, and my guest is Grant Cameron. And I think we kind of wrapped up what we were talking about before the break. And I would like to talk to you just a little bit more about the red star, because I know that was like a major deal. Now, I remember you mentioned the term viral, that things didn't go viral in a way that they do today. Today there's YouTube, and there's other ways that things, social media, that things go viral. But back then, when you're talking about viral, you're talking about worldwide news, right? Isn't that what happened?
Yeah, we had the National Enquirer came up, I believe, 3 times. So I got to actually know Bob Pratt, who was, and most people don't realize, this sort of thing to the National, the tabloids is a bunch of garbage and made up stories and stuff. And actually, it was exactly the opposite. When it came to UFO stories, the National Enquirer in 75, 76, they're the ones that did Travis' story. They did the Larson abduction. They did the Pascagoula. They're the ones that broke that story. I mean, got it exposure and stuff like that. And Bob Pratt was a guy who came up to do the story. He came out the first time I wasn't involved. But then when he came back, and they were going to call it UFO Capital of the World, because it was not only Manitoba. What was happening, it was down in the States. And when I wrote the book, I actually pulled all the U.S. stuff out of it, because they had to cut down from 120,000 words to 70,000 words or whatever. And at that point, I would never go back to a publisher again. It was sort of like just crazy. I mean, it was like they're telling you what to pull, and you can't put this in. So basically, it was Manitoba, and then it ran in a straight line down through Minnesota, and it ran down through Wisconsin. And part of the story was, if you know the story with John Alexander's Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group, there was this story told about these, when it was written by the New York Times, and they put out the book, the UFO Working Group, they actually told a story about Elmwood, Wisconsin. That was part of the same flap. That's where the CIA sent 2 agents into that town that was getting inundated. So it wasn't just Manitoba. It was Manitoba, and it was a line ran down through Minnesota, down through Wisconsin, and actually up into Ontario. And in Ontario, they had some bizarre things that we never put in the book, like they were pulling these 15-foot triangles out of the ground that were maybe 6 inches deep. And the entire triangle, like 15 feet on a side, 6 inches deep, would be taken up and lifted over and put down and stuff like that. So that was the kind of stuff we left out of the book. But it was just very bizarre stuff. But when I look back, and I try to describe this, because a lot of people just get into UFOs now, and I always tell them, what happens now didn't happen then, and what happened then doesn't happen now. It is, and more I think about it, the more it is that this is almost like they're turning the pages of a book, and they're going through different things. It starts with, in 1897, it starts, with the wooden ships with the propellers. Then it goes to the Foo Fighters on the edges of the plane. Then the Foo Fighters go away. Then the green fireballs are over top of the nuclear power plants or the plutonium plants and stuff like that in the late 40s. And then the Adamski crafts come. And then in 62, then suddenly 61, suddenly you get the abduction start. And what was going on in 75 was very simple stuff. There was a couple that looked like abduction cases. But at that time, you got to remember, there was really no abductions. Travis Walton was abducted the same year as my experience. Mm-hmm. He was in November. Mine was in May, my first sighting. So you had Pascagoula case. You had a Nebraska police officer in '67, and you had Betty and Barney Hill. That was it for abductions. There was nobody talking about abductions.
Right.
So we weren't really looking for abductions. We had all this stuff that doesn't happen now. We had ground traces. So you'd get like a field where it would land in corn, which has, stalks like this. It would take the corn down to almost to ground level, and it would swirl this corn around. And I'd go in and do these kind of things. You'd have these landing traces, simple crop circles, where the pod marks were and stuff. That doesn't happen anymore. That hasn't happened for 20 years. These ground traces thing that went away. We had stuff like people seeing windows. That really doesn't happen much. We had the little guys with the would come out of the craft with a little rod, walking around with the rod. That doesn't happen anymore. Now it's almost like they're turning the pages of a book. So we had those kind of bizarre experiences where very dramatic, but nothing the way now, like nobody channeling, nobody talking about being on the ship, none of that kind of stuff, but lots and lots of sightings. A big object coming, little objects coming out of it, flying around, going back in, triangles flying upside down. My own experiences being very, very close. At one point, I was from the one object. I was it's hard to estimate, 50 feet, very, very close with an 8mm movie camera. So it was that kind of thing where lots of sightings. And we did have the one Sasquatch sighting, which absolutely, there's no doubt Sasquatch has got to do with UFOs. And because most people, when they do Sasquatch, they talk about, say, Oregon or Washington, you got to come to Manitoba. If you know what Manitoba's like, it's like we have this joke here. You can let your dog go and watch him run away for days. I mean, it is the flattest area in the world, and there are no trees. There's trees along riverbanks, but there are no trees. So this one incident occurred with one Sasquatch sighting, there was an Air Force base outside of Winnipeg where I live, small Air Force base, and this thing had been seen in the middle of the morning. Some woman had colic. She had her kid. She was up in the middle of the night. This being is looking in this 9-foot window. She freaks out. The dog down the street is on a chain and almost like chokes itself trying to get off the chain to try to get out. And an Aboriginal tracker actually shows me where this thing goes along the riverbank where there's a couple of trees into this clearing. And then you see the footprints go into the middle of the clearing and they stop, and the broken branches and stuff like that. So people would say, okay, it's hiding somewhere. You can't hide in Manitoba. There's like one tree per mile. I mean, a 9-foot being is not going to be hiding. And so absolutely convinced me when I saw this thing where this guy's describing this whole thing with the footprints end in the middle of this clearing and then they're gone. And it was the same time that there was cattle disappearing. We had one where they had these PMU horses, where the guy lost 32 horses in one shot. And the whole thing was that he was a scam. He was trying to get the insurance and all this kind of stuff. And I talked to the kids about this. And the one kid was 1 year old when this happened. I talked to him a couple of years ago. He said his entire life he was ostracized in school because of what had happened when he was 1 year old. This thing about the horses disappearing and stuff like that. So he had these very bizarre things where power being taken off some guy's hydro line, $700 a month, which in '75 was a lot of money coming off a hydro line, and a lot of landings. Very few actual being cases, and the one that I'm pretty sure was an abduction case, but I never did go back because the mother believed it was the devil, and so the father wanted the kid interviewed, and I was brought in on a Wednesday night when the mother went to church, and the father said, "Okay, you tell Mr. Cameron what you saw." And he was hiding behind this chair. I can still remember this to this day. This little kid, he was 7 years old, but he looked like he was about 5. He's very, very thin, hiding behind this chair on the other side of the room. I said, "Tell me," and he just looking out from under the chair, he's looking at me. And his father would tell the whole story. And this kid was urinating because he didn't have indoor plumbing there. He's on the porch, he's urinating, and this object appears 50 feet away over a tree. And the branches are breaking off this tree, and this kid's looking up, and his horse, he's got a horse, and the horse turns around. Sonny was the name of the horse. And he runs into his little barn. And this kid's standing there looking at us. And he's trying to get his sister. And he's yelling and screaming because the parents aren't home. He's yelling at his sister to come out. And he gets a gun. He gets a rifle. And he's never shot a rifle before. And the rifle would be as big as the kid. And he got the rifle and he was going to shoot this thing. He was so scared. And so the father said, I threatened this kid. I said, if you're lying to me, I will strap you to within an inch of your life. And and the kid was just behind this chair and he's just looking at me. And then I didn't know what to do. So I took this little, the schematic with all the different UFO pictures on it. And I got on my knees and went in the middle of the room and I put it down. And I said, Lonnie, can you tell me what it looked like? And he crawled out from behind. He took one look and he went, that one there. And he pointed. And I said, and here's me and this kid on the floor in the middle of the room. And I said, Lonnie, was it big? Big as a house. I said, did it have lights on it? Lights all over it. And then I said, what color? All different colors. Then they turned white. And I said, did it fly away? Went on the road. And it moved to the road, sit on the road just about 50 yards. And then I said, did it fly away or did it go out like a light? Out like a light. And they had pulled this kid out of school because he had all sorts of, he was bleeding, he had blood, nose, his hair was falling out, shit, all this kind of stuff. They had actually pulled this kid out of school, but the mother would not allow this kid to be interviewed. Now I was going to go back later because this looked like a sort of a classic, sort of an abduction type thing. But he may have gone the same way as his mother and believed this was the devil. So I never really did go back and interview this kid again. So we had, but very, very bizarre stories of, you'll hear these other places where, and it was called Charlie Red Star. It was the red object. Everybody's seen the same thing. And it was like a plasma, glowing, pulsing plasma object. And this thing would come across in the early days when it first started, because it went on for over a year. And it would go over this. They had a reservoir there called Stevensville Dam. And kids were drinking in the middle of the night. And they were sitting on the deck, on the sort of the dock. And they're drinking. And the Charlie Red Star appears. And it shoots this beam down into the lake, and they're looking at this thing, and then this white object starts to appear under the water, and it gets bigger, and then the object starts coming towards them. Meanwhile, this beam is still in the lake, and the object is still sitting there, and this white thing is coming just below the water, just a couple inches below the water, is coming towards them, and they're freaking out. And the one person takes a rock and throws it at this thing, and hits this white thing, and it breaks into about 5 pieces, and these pieces go like this, and they go back and reassemble where the beam is going in, and back up into the craft, and the craft flies away. So very, very bizarre things, and a lot of landing trace stuff like that. And I did some polls, like I would do polls at the high school, and I asked, for example, at the high school, how many kids have seen something in the last 2 years that we would consider to be a UFO? And it was like 59%. I said, how many people have seen a 747 jumbo jet? Without seeing it on a picture, just actually seen a real, and it was like 35% or something. It was very, very high. It was like over half the kids. And then I'd go into towns where I was lecturing where they didn't have the sightings, and it would be down to 11%, the national average. But in towns around Carmen, it was very, very high. And then we had these ground trace lights, and that's when I sort of quit it. I don't know what happened after 76, because what happened there was these big ones were flying around. Then I would get all these guys who would say, oh, I can film this thing. And I'd say, okay, bring your cameras. And they bring these huge telephoto lenses out and all this kind of stuff. And people from the university, and they're trying to film this thing as these things are flying around. And the first night we saw these small ones on the ground, and now they're called orbs. But in 75, there's nobody talking about orbs. We called them ground lights. Yeah. And these things would appear on the road. And the first night, it's a long story, but the first night that I saw them, I got to within 50 feet of this thing. And I had a camera. I was running an 8mm movie camera. We had binoculars. It was so close, and there was actually written up in the paper there. It was so close. I said to my friend Jim, I said, Jim, hold the camera. I'm going to jump on it. And if you remember back in 67, there was the famous Stephen Michalak case in Falcon Lake. So by then I had done some UFO research, and I knew that Michalak had got burned really bad. Oh, yeah. And I knew there was a chance I was going to get burned. But what had happened is we came up, it was sitting on this a wooden bridge draining the water off the fields. And it was this far from the edge of the bridge. And it was so bizarre because it was so bright you couldn't look at it in the binoculars. It was just terribly bright. And yet it was just casting this glow on the side of the railing, the wooden railing. And it can still to this day, I'm looking at this thing going, why is it not lighting up the bridge? So we always called it a dead light. It was intense light, but it wasn't throwing any light off anywhere. Mm-hmm. So we'd gone to the bridge, and it had disappeared. And so we looked under the bridge. It's got to be under the bridge here. And at that time, the National Enquirer had an award. It was $1 million to produce a UFO in 75. So they had what was called a Bates ball. It had been discovered in a field in Florida. And it was a steel ball, like a bowling ball, but it was steel and had no seams on it. And they were x-raying it, and they had put this thing in for this $1 million award. So I said, it's got to be one of these steel balls. It's just turned the light off and it's underneath the bridge. So we're looking, we go down the other side of the bridge and now it's behind us. It's on the bridge again. I go up to the bridge and we drive up on the bridge and it's gone again. We look again, we can't find it. Went back into the north where we'd come from. And it was at that point I said, this time let's walk. Because every time we drive the car up to the bridge, it disappears. And so I had given him the camera and it was like, it's about to take off. It's taken off twice already. And I'm going to hit it. It's like I'm like the doubting Thomas, you know, unless I feel the wounds, I won't believe. And I was like, hold it, I'm going to jump on it. And I was going to go and I was going to try to jump and swat it to touch it as it took off. And I knew I could get burned. And then my friend said, well, there's one, I think there's one sitting on top of the car. And I went, what? And I turned around and took the binoculars and I looked into the north and it looked like the sun coming up in the north. And it was this orange thing on top of the car, this orange semi-sphere on top of the car and this orange smoke hanging down the side of the car. And I went, it's sitting right on top of the car. And I took 5 steps. I started to run and immediately I knew, oh shoot. And I turned around. Of course, the one of the bridge is gone. And so we ran back and it moved onto the front hood. You could see it looked like the inside of the car was on fire and then went down on the road and into the water. There was water all over in the fields. And then I tried to talk my friend into going back because it was back at the bridge again. But he wouldn't go back. So I had these kind of experiences. I was 5 times. I was really close 5 times. So to me, there was never any doubt what this was. And I sort of feel sorry for people because lots of times I go to a conference and they'll say, let's go do Skywatch. And I go, no, I don't want to do Skywatch. I've been there. I don't want to do no sighting stuff. I'm more interested in what they're doing. What's the message, all that kind of stuff. Oh, no. And then we go out and they're fighting about this thing's moving. It's moving. No, it's not. It's a star. It's a planet. No, it's moving. And I go like, man, if you guys saw what I saw, I'm going to bed. Like, you guys are wasting your time. And you saw what I saw. You'd know this is for real. So I was lucky that I saw it 5 times up close. And I got lucky a number of times in terms of how things fit together as I did my research. That to me, I always say this is a Super Bowl of all stories. I was lucky enough to play in the game, and I got to meet some unbelievably important people in my life, and I got some very, very bizarre stories that happened during my life. I didn't have a lot. I had the Chris Bledsoe story, which you probably heard, and I've had a couple messages from aliens that turned into books and stuff like that. I haven't had direct experience, but the odd time. So when somebody's got a message from an alien intended for me, I'll listen very carefully because I've had these experiences where it's for some reason it seems to have turned out to lead to something.
Wow.
Wow.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier is filming. I'm getting a little feedback again. Can you mind just turn that down a little bit more? Okay. One of the things you mentioned is filming. You 8mm, I think you said. Did you get any good video of this?
Well, what happened? I had 3-minute. If you remember back then, you film it in 3-minute. These little things. I've still got them, and I only got this thing analyzed 2 years ago when the publishing company. It was actually a bizarre story that happened with Charlie Wedstar. There was a producer in Toronto, Canada, who wanted to do the book. She optioned the book for a movie. And this gets into this Mission Rama. If you've followed my story of Mission Rama and how I got the message from the alien and I got dragged into that whole story, she wants to do the thing. So what happens is that this Dundurn Publishing, she sets it up. I cancel it. I deep six the project. Then she sets up the book again, and I say, well, I better not embarrass my friend a second time. So I go ahead with the book, and it was at that point when I went and got these films analyzed. I went and got them processed. Like, it took them in 76, and I didn't get them processed till like 2 years ago.
Wow.
And so I'm pretty sure I know the clip where we were, because what was happening was we drove the car back, and then I would take 7 steps, takes 3 seconds to film. 7 steps, 3 seconds of film. 7 steps, 3 seconds, because it had taken off twice already. So I was taking these films as I was going along to make sure I got as much as I could before, because I figured it was going to take off, and which it did, and end up getting rid of us. But so I think I know what it was, and I produced one. But it's the old thing. It's like when you're holding an 8mm movie camera, and it's like pitch black, like there is nothing. This is the middle of nowhere. There's even the road disappears. It's going towards the American border, and then suddenly it's a gravel road, and then it's a dirt road, and then it's sort of like you can sort of see there's a road there, and that's it, you know. And so it was that kind of thing. So it's this orange ball is bouncing around on the thing. So it's not that good. But the one where I got very close, I'm pretty sure I've got the one, and then a couple of these angel things appeared on some of the video. Now I don't know where that came from. It looked like angels without heads. It appeared in one of the films. So I had these 3 3-minute things that I got processed. And of course, what happened was it was like the old UFO film in the 70s. The same thing. You'd go and you'd say, "Okay, this is going to look like there's nothing on it, but I still want you to process." And it was the same thing. And they came back and they charged me all this money, and I go. And then I went and looked on my, they give you the readout or the DVD, and I go and look, and there's no video. And I go back and I said, "Where's the video?" And they said, "Well, we did it." And I said, "No, you didn't. There's one, but the other two aren't processed." And then I fought with them for a couple of days, and then finally they said, "Oh, they told us there's nothing on it." And I said, "It says right on the instructions. It may look like there's nothing on it. Process it anyway. I'm paying for this." And then they processed it, and then this object appeared. Like most of the film was black, and then there's just this period where you have this orange, and it was orange. And it only appeared orange the first 2 nights. After that, it sort of turned white. And then what would happen is it was there all the time. And we could flash lights at it, and it would flash back, and this kind of stuff. And I would start take people out. And this is where my career ended with this sighting nonsense. I'd take people out there, and they would say the same thing. They'd look, and we're looking towards the U.S. border on what are called mile roads. So every mile there's a road, and every mile there's a road this way. So you can tell exactly how many miles you are in any direction just by keeping in the back of your head where you are. So we'd be there, and then they'd say, "Oh, it's just a car coming down the road." I'd say, "No, it's not a car." "Yeah, it's a car. It's a car coming down the road." I said, "There's nothing down that road. This is like an abandoned road." And I said, "How long do you think it's going to take the car to get here?" And they say, 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes, I go, "Still think it's a car?" And they go, "No, it's not a car." And then we'd flash lights at it, and it would flash back and stuff. And then they say, "Oh, it's a farm light." And I'd say, "Okay, let's go down the road." We go down the road, and then it convince them it's not a farm light. And then they'd say, "Well, that's kind of weird. Let's go behind it. Let's go down the next mile road, come around from behind it." We'd try that. We'd drive down the road. Somebody would roll into the ditch. You'd push this thing down because it would follow the car back down. And then you'd go back and you'd watch the car go by. And then you're waiting for this ball to come sailing by. And of course, it wouldn't. It was almost like the Skinwalker Ranch thing. Not only did it know what you were doing, it knew what you were about to do. You could not fool this thing. So I would take these films and we'd do infrared. We'd flash lights at it. It would flash back, and we do these infrared photographs and stuff like that. But other than that, it was a total waste of time. And so people would say, "Okay, I got this bunch of people that want to go out again." I say, "Okay, here's how it works. You go down Highway 3, turn at 205, go 2 miles down 205, turn towards the U.S. border, have a good time. I'm not going. I'm totally burned out by this thing." And I don't know what happened after that, whether people kept going, but it was there. And then I had the experience in 76 where I've got a group of kids with me. And that was, people always ask me, "Have you ever been abducted?" And I say, if I was abducted, this is when it happened. And this was, we had seen one of these things, and it was in a different spot, these lights. And one would do the tricks, and there would be one that would be dimmed down, and one would do the tricks. You'd flash it, and this one would pulse back 3 times or go side to side, whatever you did with the flashlight. And the other one would sort of move off the road. And I saw them, and I took these kids. I said, "Look, here's some new ones." So I take the kid out. I took the first kid out. I flashed the lights. The thing would flash back 3 times. And this kid's all getting all excited. He's about 14 years old, all excited. And then I said, "Get your brother out. Let's get your brother out." And I took the brother out. And that's when I flashed this thing at the object. And it made this beeping, whistling noise. One of the few times I ever heard noise. And it was like a Morse code, but it was bzz, 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 like a whistling noise. And I'm going, "Oh, my God." And it was like, there's nothing in this thing. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got it upset now, and the big one's going to come down. And I looked on the American border, and there's this huge arc welding light on the American border. And I've described it. You'll hear people describe this. There's no words in the world to describe how scared you are. It's unbelievable. I was absolutely petrified. And so I said to the kid, I said, "Let's go back to the car." So we go back to the car. We get in the car, and he goes in the back seat. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking. We're sitting parallel to it, so it's out the passenger window. And I'm trying to not look at it, and I'm just absolutely sweating. I'm just like deadly scared. And they told me that when it went over the top of the small objects, this blue light came down, and then it went around, and I could see it out of the corner of my eye, and it was still this arc welding light. And I'm saying, "Don't turn, don't turn, don't turn." And it starts to turn. I'm going, "No, don't turn." And then it turns down the road, and suddenly it's a triangle, and it's with the flat end towards us, 2 red lights and a green light in the back, and it's tilted on an angle, and it came right above the car. And I'm telling you, scared, you can't believe it. It was right above me, and I said to the kids, I said, "Give me my binoculars." They're jumping around. They're all excited. They're jumping around. I'm petrified. These kids aren't coming home or being abducted, whatever. And I took it with the binoculars. And I'm holding the binoculars against the inside of the glass. My hands were shaking so bad. And I can tell you, it was either very close or very big because it was the entire field of vision. It was that big. It was in the entire field of vision. And I'm looking up at this thing. And I had another one. You may have heard some of these descriptions. I had a guy who was flying a plane who described this. It was like you cut a film and you put the film back together. You cut the film, put it back together, and it starts to move again. It was sitting like this on an angle above us, and it just moved that much to the left. It just went like that. Just the slightest little bit to the left. The fear instantly went away. It's gone. No fear whatsoever. It just moved, and then it started to sort of fly away towards this microwave tower. Clearly could see this triangle of lights. Suddenly there's these lights behind me. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police are there. And they come in, and their lights are flashing. And I said to the kids, I said, watch, I'm going to get this guy. Because they had actually been involved in the early days when the National Enquirer was there. The National Enquirer interviewed two guys, never transferred out. And in Canada, you get transferred out. You could be in the Arctic. You don't want to get transferred out if you're on the Canadian border. And so this guy came up and I said, watch, I'm going to get this guy. So he rolls down the window. He says, so what's going on here? And I said, see that object there? And this triangle, clear as day, this triangle is flying towards this microwave tower. And he goes, yeah, I see it. And I said, oh, we're watching these lights down at the road. No mention about the triangle. Just, you see it? Yep. We're watching these lights in the road. He said, what lights? And then I said, well, turn your lights off because you got the flashers going and all this sort of stuff. And I'll show you. So the kids are all excited. They're jumping around, whatever. And this is like a federal police officer. Comes and he turns all his lights off, turns the car off, whatever. And we go and and there's nothing. Black as can be. I take the flashlight, put it up in the air, put it back down. This orange light, this sort of orangish white light comes up, goes back down. I go from side to side. This thing's sort of moving. And he's looking. And then he goes, oh, it's probably just a couple of guys down at the end of the road having a beer. I said, well, we've been following it for 8 miles now. And I guess he suddenly realized, because I'd been written up in the paper for wanting to jump on this one, the sightings, RCMP officers have been, and he suddenly realized, this is the UFO guy, and I'm not going on the record here. And he said, okay, I guess we'll see you guys. And he starts walking towards his car, and then he's going a little faster. And I said to the kids, get us a license plate number. And then he starts to run, and he jumps in the car and starts the car, and he takes off. The gravel's flying, and these 3 kids are running down after a federal police officer with the flashlights. And we got his license plate number, and I was going to go and bug him, but I figured, I don't want to ruin his career. But those are kind of experiences we had. But we didn't, it was sighting stuff. It was, very simple stuff, very exciting to be in. And it was only the one time when it turned on us. Like before, we would chase it all the time because it was going so slow you could actually catch up on it. It was that slow and it was so low to the ground. So it was an exciting time.
Wow, that really sounds like something. We have just less than a minute to coming up on the break here. When you're talking about this happening over and over again, maybe we won't have much time to talk about it, but I'd like to talk about it after the break. And why do you suppose there's flaps? Why do you suppose, if it is, let's just say extraterrestrial, why is it visiting over and over and over again, night after night? I mean, that, again, we only have, 20 seconds.
Well, I can explain in 30 seconds, I can explain why it happened to us. In 1975, in February of 1975, the Americans put the only anti-ballistic missile unit ever to go operational, 100 nuclear missiles. North Dakota had 300 Minuteman nuclear missiles that would take out every country in the world, and then they put in another 100. It was pre-Star Wars. This is 75. They're on the ground. They put in 100 new nuclear missiles. They put them in February. The sightings start immediately. They started taking them out. They negotiated with the Russians in November. They started taking them out. The UFOs went away.
Amazing.
And they haven't had a sighting there since.
You did that in perfect time. So, all right, everyone, you're listening to KGRA Radio. My guest is Grant Cameron, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis with KGRA Radio on Podcast UFO. My guest is Grant Cameron. So, Grant, we were talking about flaps before the break, and so I understand, that's really amazing that there was some, nukes and how that seemed to stir up all the sightings. And that's one of the earlier things that I'd heard about UFOs is their attraction to nuclear weapons and all that, and which is really fascinating. But how do you suppose that other flaps that don't involve any nuclear weapons? I mean, how can you envision the purpose of how those things happen?
Well, to me, I've got a theory. Like you've got the new Atom project by To the Stars, the research project, and everybody uses acronyms. So I got my own little acronym for my own little new project, and it's called TTOW, the theory of wow. And the more I look at UFOs, the more I think it's got to do with the theory of wow. It's really got nothing to do with anything. It's basically all messaging. And so you take a look at cattle mutilations, for example. If you look at David Perkins got maybe the biggest collection of cattle mutilations, says it's all downwind and downstream from nuclear power activities. And so you look at the connection there that you may not see it immediately. Or I always say, like with cattle mutilations, like, and I say it to Linda all the time, like, Linda, why did they drop the cow? They've got the cow already. I mean, they've got it. I mean, they're taking it. Or John Alexander, if you've heard some of the recent interviews, the one that John does about the Skinwalker Ranch with the cow mutilation, where they pummel the inside of the heart. Like, why would you do that? I mean, if you're going to do, alien hybrids, what are you doing this with the heart? Or you pull the heart out with no exit wound, or the brain out with no exit wound. And it's like all they're trying to do, and that's where I got this theory of wow, is like all they want you to do is go, wow, what's going on? And they're trying to make you think. And that's like, if you example, give you an example, because one that you just did. Let's take a look at John Lennon. So John Lennon has this sighting August of 1974 with May Pang. They're on there. It goes on for 10 minutes. May Pang's trying to take pictures. She can't take pictures. And John describes it's got these light bulbs on it. It's going, and these light bulbs, light bulbs are going off and on. I have this little kid that I described to you before, lights all over the thing. And almost all the time you have these situations where they have these lights. Now my question is, with John Lennon, do you need white little light bulbs flashing off and on to go through interstellar space? Why do UFOs have lights on them? So you can see them. So you can go, wow, what is that? When you see a UFO, you're part of the game. They want you to see it because when they abduct people, you don't see them. They can cloak themselves anytime they want. So when you see them, so you have Jan Hartson on. And what does Jan Hartson describe? Jan Hartson is sitting there. We should build a UFO. And then within a month, suddenly there's a orange UFO, 3 feet high, that's 30 feet away, and it's got blue, dryer vent things coming off the side and suction cups. Like, is that really what it looked like? Or is that a screen image? Is that this whole thing where they just wanted Jan to go, wow, because down the road, they need Jan to spread the message. So I see people say, and there's a second download I got, which I haven't really got into. It's 24 elements the second time. And one of the elements was, is it a random world or is it a non-random world? And we assume it's a random world, that these things are just happening. And that's one world. So if it's a random world, that's what happens. But if it's not a random world, if you are psychic and you can actually say, 3 days from now, Martin Willis is going to have a car accident, and he has a car accident, then is it a random world? So you start looking at, if it's not a random world, then it's a whole different world. The same thing as John Alexander talks, and this is something I'm really getting into now, is the thing I think we should solve is what happens at death, the reincarnation. And John brings this up because John's got a degree in thanatology, and that's where I started. I did this big study when I was at university on weird things that happen when people die. And I would go to chaplains and stuff. So it's the whole idea. Is it one life? If it's one life, then it's one world. But if it's multiple lives, if you look at the UFO phenomena and we're living multiple lives and we're coming in here to experience things and stuff like that, it's a whole different world. So it's this whole thing where, is Jan Hartson's experience random? Was my experience. Because when I had my first experience, as I said, we didn't go out in February when this thing started. And we kept driving around the city. And if it had not been for this film being taken by this TV network, I never would have gone. I had no interest in UFOs, none. And what happened was, and I didn't realize this till 35 years later, suddenly the light came on. What happened was the crews were going out from these different TV stations and they couldn't get the thing. It was flying around and they had seen it on the ground. They'd seen it. They couldn't get it the night. So they went back to the producer and they said, we just about got it. We want to go out again tomorrow night. And the assistant news producer at this station said, this is BS. Nobody's going out anymore. I'm not paying any more overtime. You guys want to go chase this stupid flying saucer? You can go on your own time. So they put a crew together of people from this TV station who were volunteers. They went out on their own time and they didn't have a cameraman. The guy who shot the famous film was a film editor. They didn't have a cameraman. So this is the first time this guy ever shot when, in the 75, there's these huge TV cameras and they've got it out and they go onto this road, like we're looking down these mile roads, and this thing's down the road. And so what they do is they see it, they leave the cameraman here, by this big, huge tower, this big communications tower. They send someone on the North Road. They go up 1 mile and they go down, and 1 mile and they go down. So they come around and they're going to try to come across on the side. And the one on the north side actually comes across. And what they describe is this object, 8.25 miles, because we had the radiation readings on the ground. We know exactly where it was. 8.25 miles away from the camera. And the thing is sitting on a 45-degree angle. It looked like a drive-in movie screen, but it was red, blood red, drive-in movie screen. It wasn't touching the ground, poking above this row of trees where they plant these trees along the edge of the field. And it's sitting there, and then they go, wow. And they're looking around to get there, because they're in the middle of nowhere. They're getting their perspective of where are we, so we can come back tomorrow and do the radiation readings, whatever. And then they look back, and this thing is gone. And they go, where did it go? It disappeared. Meanwhile, the guy at the end of the road, and this is the key part, and I didn't realize this till 35 years later. The guy at the end of the road realized they'd gotten something. They almost got something the night before. They need to get something, and you could see this thing would glow up, and would glow back down, would glow up, glow back down. And he's watching through the viewfinder, and he says, okay, next time this thing glows up, I'm going to shoot so I get something on camera. And so it was almost like the UFO thing. Are you ready? You ready? We're about to jump. Watch. And so he goes like this, and as it starts to glow up, he shoots the camera, and the thing jumps in the air. And it's 8.25 miles away, and it jumps. And if you've seen it, it's on a documentary called UFO Cover-Up Live, which was run in 1988. You can actually see this film. Jacques Vallée shows this film. It goes from the bottom of the frame to the top of the frame in 3 frames. It lights up the whole, one frame lights up the entire horizon. You see these big humps of light on the horizon. So it jumps in 3 frames. That's 8.25 miles away. One of the estimates was it jumped 5,000 feet in 3 frames of film. And so he gets this on film, and suddenly it's a viral film, and he's caught with this thing. So I'm thinking to myself, 35 years later, I'm going, that wasn't random. That wasn't random. He didn't actually push the camera just as this thing jumped. It was timed. And then I started looking at this whole thing as this random. So that's where I got this theory of wow. And I started looking at all the different stuff. And it's like the grade 1 project is to put lights on crafts. So we do this kind of stuff. And then the one is cattle mutilations, all these different weird cattle mutilations. And we'll put them downwind from power, nuclear stuff. And then the other one is this whole thing with the metals. If you look at these metals, Jacques Vallée is doing this stuff with the metals. Have you ever seen 2 pieces of metal that are ever the same? If you look at the chart that Jacques Vallée, he did a slide presentation in Contact. If you look at the slide presentation, you look at all these metals and what it is, and because I've been in this thing since before Jesus was a carpenter, I know this stuff is going on, is that you get these things in 1947, you get this UFO, and it looks like it's going to crash, and everybody's looking like the bird with the broken wing that wants to get you away from the nest, and the UFO looks like it's going to crash, and everybody's watching, like it's going to crash, and all of a sudden it stabilizes and it shoots out this metal, and everybody goes and grabs the metal, but no 2 pieces of metal I've seen are the same. They're all different. And then I started looking at the implants, and I talked to one guy who worked on implants. I said, you got these implants, are there ever 2 the same? And he said, no, completely different. And it's the whole thing is, if it's a craft, why is it not the same? Or why you have these little pieces? Why these, if it comes across the universe and then crashes and breaks into these little pieces, maybe the pieces are being given to us. Maybe it's you got this layered piece with the 38, the arts parts that Linda's been working on. The pieces, it's because they want you to go, wow, this is cool. And it's almost like plowing the field. So it's almost like UFO sightings, where you look, you say, yeah, it looks like it's we didn't build it. It looks like it's for real. It's a UFO. And then you get another sighting, you do the same thing. And the same thing with the metal, is you're going to get these pieces of metal and you go like, we couldn't have made that, man. There's no way you can make that thing. And we're just going to plow the same field. We're going to say, yes, UFOs are real. Whereas I've got this situation where I knew that in 1975. I mean, I was close up. It's like, there's no doubt in my mind this thing's for real. And that's where I say you got to get to the next part of the story, is they're doing the wow thing, almost like To the Stars is doing the same thing. Drop a video, drop a piece of metal story, all this kind of stuff, and you're raising consciousness. You put it in the New York Times, you bypass the UFO community, you're raising consciousness. And so that's where I had this theory of wow. And I look at all the different UFO phenomena, and to me that's what it looks like, is that's all they seem to be doing, is they're messaging. Everything is messaging. That's all they're doing. They're doing this kind of stuff to raise consciousness, to make us think, to say, something's going on here. I don't think we're alone. And as it goes up, you're going to get to a certain point where the consciousness will sort of like it flips, where suddenly everybody goes, oh yeah, this is for real. even if you look at one of the guys that works for To the Stars was this Kit Green, was one of the CIA guys that ran the CIA program. And he's interviewed by this guy from Great Britain, Pilkington, I think was the guy's name, where he's talking to him, and Jacques Vallée says, well, not Jacques Vallée, Kit Green says, so what would you do if you were responsible for this program? I mean, it's fine for you to say, you should do this, do that. What if you had to deal with this? So you're the government. What do you do? Well, you put out these memes about, oh, the aliens are here and they're going to eat our kids and all this kind of stuff. And then when it breaks, it's like, it's just extraterrestrials or whatever it is visiting the planet. Everybody goes, what, they're not eating our kids? And you go, no, it's not eating our kids. And it's like, so it's a big deal. It's like this, almost like they're doing this to get people acclimatized to this whole thing. That it's almost like the idea that science advances one funeral at a time. It's not something where you're going to have a piece of evidence where everybody's going to go, oh, okay, it's, we all give up on our beliefs. Everybody still has their belief system. So it's this gradual acclimatization that they've been doing. And that's why I say, why do UFOs have lights on? I mean, even like this thing of how I got involved, or if you hear the story of how Bud Hopkins got involved. I don't know if you know the story of how Bud Hopkins got. 75, same year as me. Bud Hopkins is down, he's buying booze at the corner, the guy who sells the booze at the corner. And the guy says, this weird thing happened. I saw this flying saucer, and there was these beings around the craft, and it looked like they were digging. They had shovels, and they were digging. And Bud went, what do you mean digging? And he goes to where this guy describes it, and there's 15 holes 5 inches deep. And then Bud is like hooked. He's going, whoa. And then there's this apartment complex. So he goes to the apartment complex, and he talks to the guy, the night watchman guy that's there, and he said, do you ever see anything in that field over there? And the guy, oh, yeah, I saw this thing, and it was there. And Bud is hooked. And then you realize with Bud, you say, well, that's how it started, but it's not. 1964, Bud has a sighting. And if you ever hear the audio of Bud talking about that sighting, you go, that guy's an experiencer, man. The thing's right above the craft, middle of the day. It's just sitting there. He's there with 2 people from Britain. He's driving these people, and he's driving, and he's looking at this thing, and it's just sort of looking back, and he's sitting there. The next day, he goes back, he redrives the route. How long was he on the route? How long did it take? This sort of stuff. And then you go back and you realize that Bud Hopkins, when he was like 6 or 7 years old, was in his room when the War of the Worlds was going on. And his family was freaking out. His parents were freaking out. And Bud is looking out the window, and he's looking to see if these aliens are invading. And his father's freaking out, and his mother's crying. And the neighbor comes in with the guns and says, we're going to the top of the hill. I want you to come. We're gonna take a stand. We're gonna stop these guys, whatever. And Bud's parents don't go. When you start seeing that, you go like, maybe this wasn't all random. Maybe this is all sort of planned. And that's where I get these bizarre things where Chris Bledsoe gives me this phone call and says, well, I got a message from the Guardians. And whenever Chris Bledsoe says he's got something, I listen very carefully. And that turned into a book. And then when I did the Charlie Red Star book, I got a second message. When I was doing the book, there was this Mission Rama story. That's why they wanted to option my book for a movie. And I said, Mission Rama, I don't care about the stupid, whatever you want to use the stupid movie, the option for, I don't really care. And they're telling them this Mission Rama thing, and they need a Canadian story to start the movie. And then they're going to go to Peru because nobody will finance the movie in Canada. They want to do this Peruvian thing. And I'm driving across the desert, and the girl that's with me, my assistant, suddenly gets a phone call. And this is after Chris's message, where it turned into a book. So I get this message, and it's Aunt Terrell. Oh, and this message from Aunt Terrell that he knows I'm coming to the mountain, and I'm supposed to tell people that there's going to be a program sighting on Saturday night. So, of course, this time I go, get the message. What exactly is the message? Get it for real. What exactly does it say? All the words. And so I listen very carefully to this kind of stuff. And so I see it as a completely different thing where people seeing it's random. It's, we're biological robots in a random, meaningless universe. And I say, no, it's a consciousness universe. And it's all like Rupert Sheldrake. It's all sort of morphogenetic fields and memory and learning and all this kind of stuff. And they're just playing this role. They're just in this higher level of water, and they're trying to move us into this higher level of water. We're at that stage now where we've got the technology of nuclear weapons, which they're just terrified of, that we can, sort of blow up the place. And so that's my new theory. And the more I look at it, I'm actually probably going to write a short little book on this thing, the theory of wow. And I'm going to go through all the UFO evidence and say, all they do is they want you to make you go wow, to realize something's going on. And to me, that it just makes total sense to me that they're really not here to do anything. They're just here to raise consciousness.
In that case, if you were going to argue that case, would you wonder why there hasn't been more mass sightings then to actually evolve that a little quicker?
Well, there was mass sightings. There was the Phoenix Lights was 10,000. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of the things is, do the aliens need a craft that's 2 miles wide? Like, why are you flying a craft that's 2 miles wide or a mile wide or whatever it was? You get these, like this thing with where the object breaks into pieces in Carmen in 1975. It's just like really, really bizarre stories. And they want you to go like, wow, do you see what happened? And I'll tell you the Chris Bledsoe story. And I've probably told you before. This is the one that really got my attention. And this was the thing where I knew Chris Bledsoe. I sort of knew his story. And he had been contacted by Warner Brothers. They wanted to do the movie. Mel Gibson wanted to do the movie, and they had said to Chris, the two screenwriters were Chad and Carrie Hayes, and they said, Warner Brothers would like a message or a sign that we should do the movie. And Chris said, oh, okay. He didn't know what to do, pray, whatever. And the next night is when the tree burned. This bizarre thing where the inside of the tree burns 3 times in 6 hours. And they got the hose up, and the inside of the tree is completely soaked with water, and then it starts on fire again, and it starts on fire, and the kids got the iPad, and they're filming this thing, and they go back to Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers says, oh yeah, that's what we want. Thank you. We're going to do the movie. And so I always had this idea in the back of my head that they wanted, that's why Chris had, the first night was 14 UFOs, 5 different types of five alien sightings, just like 5 witnesses, just bizarre. His first night, this whole story of what happens on the first night, and it's almost like it's a movie. And now he looks like he's got a program going. So I knew that he had this bizarre stuff, and I knew that White House was watching him. Intelligence, defense, NASA, all these people were watching him. And so I was going to lecture in Florida, and that's when I go to his house. And I'm taking pictures of the tree, and he's telling me all these different stories. We're going to all the different sites where all this stuff happens, whatever. And it's very interesting to watch, when he's directly, almost like when he took John Alexander there. And I give you credit, because you asked John Alexander the one question that I never would have thought to ask, which was, you asked him, why would you go see Chris Bledsoe? Do you remember what John said?
No. I remember,
he said,
talking to him.
My sponsor asked me to go and see him. And I went, wow. So John's involved in this whole thing, and they're watching Chris. So John goes there. Same thing as I went there. I went there because this guy had this bizarre stuff. And so I'm there, and the story starts. We're there. I'm about to go to Florida. I've got to rent a car. I'm coming from Citizens Hearing in Washington. I got to rent a car. We're playing on Facebook. His wife has left. His kids are all like their university age. They're all gone, whatever. And we're playing on Facebook. And all of a sudden I hear Chris go, what are you guys doing back in the room? And I look, and he's got 3 dogs. He's got the big black lab. He's got a medium-sized Heinz 57 type dog. And he's got this little chihuahua. And the 3 dogs are standing there looking at us. And he goes, how'd you get back in the house? So we go to the front door, and the front door is wide open. Wide open. Not just open. It's wide open. And he just goes, how'd that get open? He puts the dogs back out. And I say, okay, Chris, I got to go. I'm going to Florida, whatever. And I say goodbye. I say, I'll stop back on my way back from Florida to take the rent-a-car back to Washington. So I get to Florida, and he said, you know what? It happened twice more after you left. I went back in the house. I'm sitting there, and suddenly the dogs are back in the house, and the front door is wide open again. And then I put them outside again, closed the door, went to the bathroom. I came out of the bathroom, front door is wide open, the dogs are back in the house. And I went, whatever. It's like the random thing. Whatever, you left the door open. I wasn't impressed at all. So when I come back, this happens within 10 minutes of when I come back. I parked the car beside the thing. I haven't even taken my stuff out of the car yet. And luckily, I can't remember why, I had the camera in the front seat. So we go there, take some more pictures of the burning tree, all this sort of stuff. We're standing on the back deck, and it's a concrete deck. And Chris said, let's go in the house. I said, okay. So we go in the house, and the Nellie, who's the black lab, is right behind us on the grass, like 5 or 7 feet behind me, chewing on this gourd, lying on the grass. So we go, and you know how the dog wants to get in the house before you. So Chris is here, I'm here, the dog comes on this side of me. We go by, and all I hear is Chris say, Nellie, what happened, Nellie? And I look, and the dog has passed me, and the blood is shooting out the dog's neck. So, and it's all over the walls. And the blood is like a hidden artery.
Yeah.
And I'm going, when they're letting the dogs out of the house, I go, that's garbage. But I'm going, wow, this is weird. I run to the car, get the camera, and I start photographing this thing. And I'm photographing, and Chris has got the rag, and it's all full of blood. And the kid comes up with a semi-automatic rifle, and we're looking around. You can see exactly where the blood started. It was just the most bizarre. And then I look at my pants. My pants are completely covered with blood. Yeah, it's almost like my impression was, and I argued with Chris, because Chris said, "Oh, that was the shadow people that did that." I said, "Wait a minute, shadow people," because experiences have these two-dimensional shadow people that go along the walls. And I go, "Why would the shadow people do that?" He said, "Well, they're evil." I said, "Well, how do you know they're evil? They're dark." I said, "Doesn't mean they're evil." I said, "You know what I think happened? I think they were letting the dogs out of the house. They wanted this in the movie. They wanted this bizarre stuff because he has these real bizarre things happen around him." I said, they wanted this in the movie. And I said, garbage. I'm not really impressed. And so they said, "You aren't impressed with that? Watch this." So the blood was on me. It wasn't on anybody else. The side of my pants were completely, and it takes a dog like a half a second, quarter second to go by. It looked like the dog had been standing there for 10 minutes. Blood all over my pants and stuff like that. And I was impressed. Like, let me tell you. And Chris, we had sort of a disagreement. But then later Chris said, "You got those photographs? Warner Brothers would like those photographs." So whenever this thing does get, that story's going to be in there. And that was a wow story. It was like, it got my attention. The same as the object was over top of the car, all this kind of stuff. To me, it's very simple that it's this wow factor. And I see it over and over again.
Wow. How'd the dog make out?
Well, he and his father looked shortly after. They couldn't find no cut on the dog.
I think I
None.
remember something about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he had the first dog. The first night they put the dog through the bush, and that's a long story I won't tell. But that dog did die. It got too close to whatever this phenomena was. That dog did die. But Nellie ended up getting hit by a car a couple of years later. But I mean, let me tell you, that got my attention. I was just like, there was no doubt in my mind what was going on after I saw my pants. It was like, wow. And then I said, "Oh, I got these famous pants. I've still got the pants." I said, "I got these famous pants. I'm never going to wash them because it's got these blood all over it, . And then I said, after a month, I said, I'll do it. Not a single spot of blood. It came out completely. After a month, it'd been sitting in my pants and nothing. So those kind of things. And I've had a couple of those very bizarre experiences, almost like the one with the Antarell, where they said there's going to be a program sighting at between 9 and 10. That's what I was told. I put on Facebook. I go there. I do the fasting. They do this fasting thing and all this sort of stuff. I play the game. It's like And then I found out that two what they call antennas. And this is the same thing. To the Stars, this group, the working with the experiencers, put off in green, and they call these people. They have the antenna. These people are actually called antennas. And when I saw the woman, a PhD psychologist from Columbia University, who was one of the people who got the message, they get these automatic writing things where they tell you when the sighting is going to take place. And when I saw 2133 on that piece of paper written in Spanish, and I heard that there was a second person got 2133, was impressed, because at 2133 over my head this thing started. And I mean, it just got my attention. It was like, wow, like these antennas, they'll pick it to the minute when it's going to take place, not the day, but the site and to the minute. And so when it happens to you, then you get this thing where, yeah, this is being sort of orchestrated from someplace else.
Wow.
I don't see it as a random phenomenon at all.
That's amazing. You were talking about messages, and one of the things that seems to come up a lot in an interview is people are getting some type of message that we should take care of the planet. What do you say about that? Do you hear anything along those lines?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, 39% of all, well, that's the stat. 39% of all experiencers on board the ship say they were shown the screen. And the screen has these environmental images. And that's why I say, whatever you think about experiencers, or maybe somebody made it up, because the Blue Book study, when they did the thing of hoaxes, the Blue Book report, they were pretty skeptical. They said 2%. So if 2% of people are hoaxing that they saw the screen on board the ship, but a lot of people describe this whole thing. And so that's one of the things I say, that they're deadly against nuclear weapons. They're in this thing. I've sort of moved away from the idea that there is actually going to be sort of like an end of the world thing. I know Chris Bledsoe was, when he got his sort of message from this shining lady person that they introduced him to, he actually dug up his backyard and he put in chicken coops, almost like the end of the world thing. It's like, survivalist type stuff. I've moved away from that, and I think they may be just trying to get across the message of take care of the planet. But then I did interview because I do the interviews with the people who fly the ship, and I did the one that's on my YouTube channel with this Ron Johnson guy from, and I knew about this guy for many years. He used to go to UFO Congress all the time. I used to see him there, and he used to tell me this guy's got a real bizarre story. But when I heard he'd flown the ship, that's when I said, Ron, can I interview you? And I interviewed him, and I said, and I've talked like 50 people I've got that on a list that have flown the ship. And I said to him, and I haven't asked many people, I said, Ron, why are they letting you fly the ship? Because I remember the first woman that told me, she was like in her 70s, a woman in her 70s. And when she told me she was flying the ship, I'm thinking to myself, you're nuts, lady. Come on. It's like, I've heard lots of weird stuff, but come on. It's like robbing a bank and then grabbing the teller to drive the getaway car. I mean, why would they let you to fly the ship? You know, it doesn't make any sense. So I said to Ron, I said, well, why are they letting you fly the ship? Why are you flying the ship? And he said, well, I'm a pilot. I'm moving people off the planet. And if you remember how I got started with, the Tuned In book, that's how the Tuned In book came with the music thing, the connection to music. Again, it was not a random event because Chris phoned me up and he said, I got a message from the Guardians. And he's the Guardians. And the Guardians are the ones that appear in the 2002 crop circle with the disc, beware of false gifts and broken promises, that whole thing. That's the Guardians. There's no doubt that's his alien. He paints it. It's done by a sketch artist. It's exactly the same alien. So he says, I got a message from the Guardians. And because I got these bizarre experiences and I'd already had the dog experience. So when he said, I got a message, I said, oh, really? So what do they want me to know? And he said, they want you to know the messages in the music. And that's when I said, well, Chris, you may be talking to the wrong guy, Chris, because I don't play music. My whole family's musical. I have no musical ability. I've never taken lessons except for 6 months when they pulled me out. I don't listen to music. I've never listened to music except when people are around me or whatever. And he said, oh, well, one song you should listen to is Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. I go, whatever, Chris. You know, like, I'm still not impressed. Like, whatever. And then it's the hook. Here comes the how they drag me in. Here's a guy who's a musical idiot, has no background in music, could not care less. He said, and the other song you should listen to is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. And that's the thing with the screen. Neil Young talks, I'm in a bombed out basement. The silver seeds are coming. They're taking the chosen ones, which is what Yvonne Smith calls the experiencers, to a new home in the sun. And what Ron says is, I'm a pilot. I'm flying people off the planet to other star systems. I said, you are? You see, I'm like a bus driver. And I go, what? And so this is what happened with this thing with Chris. When Chris said this song, and I said, whatever. And he said, it was written by Neil Young. And I went, Neil Young? That's how they got me. He said, Neil Young? Neil Young wrote that? Neil Young's part of this UFO thing with the message? And he said, yeah. I said, I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, which I said, I make the joke. This is the city in Canada where even people in Canada don't want to visit. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's the coldest major city in the world. Nobody lives here, but Neil Young grew up here. We have all these big bands that came out of Winnipeg, and Neil Young was one. So when they said, Neil Young wrote this song and it's UFO, I go, Neil Young, are you kidding me? I started to look at the music because Neil Young was involved. And as soon as I saw another song, then I found the book called Alien Rock by Michael Luckman. He's got 333 pages of all the connections between musicians and how many, had sightings and abductions and all this kind of stuff. And I was hooked, and that turned into a book. So that's the whole thing. It's like, to me, it's not random. When you see these things happening to me, and I've even got another one that I've got one, and we're going to use non-disclosure agreements. One of the projects I'm going to work on now is to get UFO documentaries distributed worldwide. There's a connection to an intelligence that definitely looks like it set this thing up. And I have to protect the guy who's the connection to the intelligence. But this is what we're working on. Desta, who's my assistant, is actually doing the negotiation. And I know that they can do this, whoever this is. And they told me that most UFO documentaries go nowhere. You may get it into it like the film festival, the EB Film Festival or whatever. You show it at one event, or one network picks it up for one presentation or whatever. But vast majority, I'm told by people who are experts at this, go nowhere. And this is a program that we are looking at now. I don't know how long it's going to take. And the only thing we're going to do is we're going to protect the source to where this is coming from. But otherwise, I think we can now make a move to distribute UFO documentaries worldwide. So this is another message I got. Another, because the guy had this experience. It came to me, and I said, "They're contacted you? I think they contacted you for a reason." And this is the whole deal: is we got to protect who this contact is. That he gets contacted with this sort of like a message, and we're trying to figure out what is he supposed to do. And I always thought it was this thing, like that's his position. He can do this kind of thing. He can move these things, move around the world, and he's in the game. I mean, he's bought in like me. He fell off the edge of the world, and he's in this game, and he's trying to figure out what am I supposed to do. And so we're just working on this right now. And so that's my world has completely changed with this consciousness thing and with these messages thing, where I see UFOs in a completely different world way I did in 75. In 75, it was just UFO sightings. This is so cool. Let's try to catch it. Let's try to film it. Stuff like that. I've come a long way since 1975.
Yeah, it really sounds it. Now, what about you worked for years on presidents and UFOs and the connection there. And a while ago, I had Chris Mellon on my show, and he basically said that if a president wanted to know about UFOs and the government had that information, then they would have to tell him.
Yeah.
And so, and then it came up with the possibility that some things may be privatized in some way where there wasn't a need to know. There wasn't any, there wouldn't have to be any like hearing or anything on it. So I just wanted your feedback on that statement.
Okay, well, what I would say is that the whole thing is, this is the presentation I'm going to do tomorrow. It's going to be an hour PowerPoint presentation on the president's Book of UFO Secrets. The president gets a presidential daily briefing. And there's this idea that some people believe that the president doesn't have a need to know, that the president is cut out, whether it's privatized or whatever. Donald Trump just solved that problem for everybody. He pulled John Brennan's security clearance. People do not realize the president does not have a security clearance. So anybody who comes to you and says, I've got 25 levels above the president or 10 or whatever, run. It's not true. The president does not have a security clearance. The president runs security clearances. He pulled John Brennan's security clearance. He said, I'm running a security clearance. You no longer have one. And he said, I'm going to pull all these other ones, the FBI. There's even a story that the rumored story was that he may pull Mueller's from the Russian investigation, pull his security clearance, because the president is the person who hands out the security clearances. The president effectively could cancel every security clearance in the country. Security clearances are not done by law. They're done through executive order. The first one was 8381 in 1941 by Roosevelt. It's established confidential and secret. Then in 51, Eisenhower added top secret. Truman added top secret. Eisenhower added need to know for national security. And they've just elaborated this whole thing of how security works. So the president can see whatever the president wants to see. And if the president, the way that, I'm going to describe this tomorrow, the president has a daily brief. So they come in, and Trump only has it every third day or something. It's all done orally. He doesn't want to read anything or whatever. But the way it usually works is you have a briefer comes into the president's office every morning with this very short, it's between 1 and 20 pages, depending what the president wants to see, how much he wants. He comes in, and this is the latest material we have around the world, the most top secret material. Here's to the president. The briefer will answer every question. And on the page, there's a book written called The President's Book of Secrets. It was written by a guy by the name of Dr. David Price. And I found this book at the same time this whole thing was happening with John Brennan. And it came together. It was like the synchronicity thing again. It came together. And what Price says is, and a lot of these presidential daily briefings have been released. The ones from the Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson have been released. So the question is, why are they releasing UFOs? Because they always release the stuff. Eventually, the historians release the stuff. It gets released. So these top secret stuff from the four administrations, a lot of them have been released. So it comes in, gives the president the briefing, and has like little points. So maybe if he doesn't like to read, it's like 2 paragraphs long, 8 items, 2 paragraphs long. And the vast majority of the paper is blank. And the reason it's blank is the president says, I want more on this. What's this about? The president can ask whatever he wants. And so if the president wants to know something, then he will basically request it, and they have to. He can pull their security clearance. They're basically, the CIA works for the president to bring the best material. One of the weird things was that Brennan, whose security clearance they pull, if you remember what happened, Brennan was the CIA director for Obama for the last 4 years. If you look at what happened during the Obama administration, and I was saying this when I wrote my books, I wrote this, that Obama was big time into this. Obama started this whole disclosure thing. They've been disclosing for 70 years. Obama was into it. He was trying to do what he could to. So under Brennan, on the CIA webpage, CIA said since 1951, we're not involved in UFOs, not interested. And then suddenly they run this article and they put it on their Twitter account that says, how do you investigate a UFO? And it's a straight up piece. So they go from not being involved to putting this on the front page. I say when they put that on the front page, they need somebody's permission. They need the president's permission. They're not going to just stick UFO thing on the front page when they've been denying the whole thing. And then you see it 2 days before Obama leaves, they release these 12 million pages of material. Remote viewing stuff, UFO stuff. And then the day after Trump comes in, he's inaugurated, Brennan shows up in Florida and Billy Cox interviews him. And he gives the spiel. Oh yeah, I've known for a long time that we were working on this stuff. We should investigate UFOs. Pro UFO stuff. Here's the guy. He's only been out of the CIA for 1 day, and he's given this pro thing. Yes, it's almost like the To the Stars. Yes, this is important. We should investigate this sort of stuff. And then you look back and start to look at this stuff, and I suddenly realized Brennan was a briefer for President Clinton. So you remember, he was one of the presidential briefers that walked in the president's office, gave him the briefing, the president would read it, and then he would have all the answers. And he'd say, okay, I want to know about this, and the presidential briefer would answer, and they'd do what's called deep dive. So if the president wants Roswell, which he did, he would say, okay, I want to know about Roswell. Do a deep dive on Roswell. And they would have to go and gather all the material. And that's what Bill said. So you hear all these stories that Bill says, you know, I was embarrassed. I tried to get stuff and I couldn't get everything. And everybody says he was denied access, whatever. But if you actually listen to it, he said, oh, I requested all the Roswell material and I looked through it and no, there wasn't a UFO. So he actually plays both sides of the game. The president can ask for whatever he says. What I say they're doing is they want the plausible deniability thing. They want you to think that it's the deep, dark cabal, because that's what they want you to chase, because you're going to chase it for the rest of your life and you're never going to find it out. If everybody suddenly realizes the president is behind the cover-up, he's the Wizard of Oz, he's the guy that runs all the security, he's the guy that controls security clearances, then everybody knows where the president lives. And that's why when you saw To the Stars, when they did the thing on December 16th, New York Times, Washington Post, Political, break the story, all at the same time, the same day, they all went, with this story took 2 months to do, timed it perfectly. Then this guy from The Hill, the newspaper The Hill in Washington, asked the question, is Obama or is Trump interested in UFOs, and is he going to refinance the ATIP program? Sarah Sanders later tells him after the news conference, says, we knew that somebody might ask that question, but we didn't think anybody would. And so what did she say? She said, well, I've never talked to Donald Trump about UFOs, but I'll ask him and I'll get back. Cannot answer a UFO question because there's plausible deniability. They want you to think the president's an idiot. He doesn't know what's going on. Donald Trump is taking orders from people behind the scenes. It's not true. Everybody's like Donald Trump. They do whatever they want, and the president has complete control, and they want you to think, because they don't want you asking questions of the president on UFOs, because it unravels very fast once you realize who's running the cover-up.
Wow. And so do you think now that things have, well, first of all, do you think things would be different if Hillary had gotten in instead of Trump? Because I remember there were people talking UFOs with her ahead of time. Or do you think the things would all just come out the way they have come out? I mean, just speculation.
Yeah, it's speculation. I think it would have been the same. I think it was planned because if you know, I wrote the book about Tom DeLonge long before Tom DeLonge came out. I was talking about this, and in fact, I was told this is what they were going to do. They were going to drop this thing. High-level government people were going to come out and out themselves and say, UFOs are real, which is exactly what happened. So they had, as you realize, they had the whatever 4-hour interview with Podesta or whatever it was, some long interview they'd done, all that kind of stuff. But what you got to remember with the Hillary Clinton thing, it's the same thing. That this is done by a book. It's not some random thing that they just sort of throw out there. It was very carefully planned because Hillary, and I always remind people, Hillary never brought up the subject of UFOs. Hillary answered 3 questions. If you remember what happened was John Podesta said to Lena Dunham, first he does the tweet and he says, the most important thing of my biggest disappointment of 2014, not getting the UFO stuff. Then later in the year, Lena Dunham does an interview with Hillary. No UFOs come up. And he said, good interview, Lena. Next time, ask her about the aliens. This is in September of 2015. So John Podesta is telling reporters, ask Hillary about the aliens. They're setting this thing up. Hillary can't bring it up. I don't know why this is. Hillary is not allowed to bring it up, but she's allowed to ask questions. So she goes on the Kimmel show. This happens in September. November, she goes on the Kimmel show. And if you remember the WikiLeaks releases, she's waiting for the question. And Kimmel doesn't ask her. And she's upset. John writes this thing. She's upset because she practiced for 5 minutes. She had this answer for the UFO thing, and they didn't ask her. And so she had to wait. And then it wasn't until Damon Steer in New Hampshire in December asks her about UFOs. And she opens up and she does it. Then she goes to the Breakfast Club. He asks her the question, and the guy says, I think I was abducted twice. And she goes, oh, yeah. Like as if nothing happened. Oh, yeah, okay. You were abducted. She's straight as can be, but she's not allowed to bring it up. So she answers 3 questions about it. So I think it might have gone a little bit faster, but I think this is, it may have been Brennan that brought up. It was the guy who did the briefing for President Obama. The way he described it is what I think is going on. It's not something that any one president wants to do. And he describes, he said, when we go into the president, when we do this big intelligence briefing that happens November after they win the election, he goes in and he says, okay, Martin, you've won the election. Here's your briefing. Now we're doing this. 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 And we're killing this guy. And we're doing this. And we're overthrowing this government. And you go through all this dirty stuff. And Obama said he was briefed in a building that had bars on the window. He said, he makes the joke. He said, if there had not been bars on the window, I might have jumped out. As they go through this briefing, we're doing this. And then what he says is called the wake-up call. So it says, Mr. President, these are done not by presidents. These are done on behalf of the presidency of the United States. And he said, when you put your hand on the Bible on January the 21st, unless you tell us to stop, Mr. President, we're still going to be doing this and this and this and this. And these are things that go through all different administrations. And the president can change it. He can stop various programs, but these are programs that run from administration. And that's what I think the UFO thing is. It's a program that's been run since 1947, since they showed Kenneth Arnold, gave him 2 UFO photographs that looked like gun camera footage and said, these are for 4th Air Force, these are UFOs, and tried to convince him that these were real UFO photographs. Or in 56, when they put Blue Book people on the UFO called the movie called UFO to advise them as to what to put in the movie. They've been helping. They've been dropping this story all the way through, and we've just accelerated this thing to a point where, the way I say it, they've been disclosing all along, but now they've learned how to do it better, and they've learned how to put steroids in the water. And that's what they've done. They've really moved this thing ahead. Jim Semivan is this expert guy who's able to do this thing. All the programs, Bill Moore's had a retired CIA guy running it. They all run the same sort of program, and they've just learned to do this, and they've done it very effectively with this New York Times thing, where they're doing almost what the beings, the aliens are doing. Because if the aliens want to disclose, they can land on the White House lawn and tell us what's going on. So they're covering up as well. They're doing this gradual climatization thing, the gradual disclosure thing. There's no doubt that the intelligence is doing this, the same as the government's doing this. If the government wanted to disclose, they'd stand up and tell us what's going on. They're not. They're doing this half. They're not covering up, because if they want to cover up, they do what Canada's doing. Shut up and quit talking about it. Nobody, I don't know what's going on in Canada. I have no idea what the Canadian government's doing because they don't talk about it. If you want to cover up, you just don't talk about it. You don't drop stuff in. So they're not, both the intelligence and the government are not disclosing, and they're not covering up. They're doing something in between. They're doing this gradual drip, drip, drip thing. And it's almost like the government learned it from the beings of how to do this, that you can't drop it in people all at one time, because you're going to get the stock market meltdown, you're going to get panic, all this sort of stuff. So you do it gradually, like Kid Green. You tell them the kids are, they're eating your kids. You put these stories in the National Enquirer and all these different places. And then when the story breaks, it's not that story. And everybody goes, oh, yeah, okay, what's the big deal? And they're manipulating people with that story to gradually, that's what the Brookings Institute report showed in the early 1960s, that you've got to acclimatize the people. If you don't do it slowly, acclimatize the people, the lower civilization could completely be wiped out.
Do you think that the government actually knows what these things are?
I think they know a lot, but I'm actually going to write a paper where I think that they really don't know very much of all. I actually was released, I don't know if you know this, I had some documents leaked to me on an eyes-only study by President Johnson. And I've got 100 of the 300 pages. They were going to write a manuscript. The guy who was running it, there was 8 people on the program, and one of them was Art Lundahl. And Art Lundahl is the equivalent of Kit Green. So what they have in the CIA, they have one operational CIA guy who runs the Weird desk, or the CI desk. So it was Art Lundahl, then it was Kit Green, now it's Ron Pandolfi. And so Art Lundahl was on this 1968 program, whatever, for President Johnson to look at UFOs, and basically they came up with nothing. And the key was that Arthur Lundahl was on this investigation, and so was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. Kelly Johnson was on there. So the question is, if Kelly Johnson's on there and Lundahl is on there and they didn't discover anything, maybe they don't know anything. The same as if you start looking at, I often wonder, because you hear all these stories, we got these spacecrafts and we're flying around or whatever. And so I say, so why is Bob Bigelow, who has all these government contacts and is putting billions of dollars into this whole thing, why has he still got little trailers that he's going to put on Mars? Why are we using rockets? Like people say, oh, we got all this sort of stuff. And then I remind the Americans, you don't even have a rocket to get to the space station. You're hitchhiking with the Russians.
Right.
You have nothing. Firmage. The story is that Firmage is working on this portal technology, anti-gravity technology. He's put $100 million into this, and I'm trying to track down. I've talked to his lead engineer. I'm trying to find out what's he actually doing. And they're talking about levitating this box off the ground an inch. And I'm going, well, if we've got all this stuff, and Firmage said, I've got high-level government contacts, I've got intelligence contacts and stuff like that. So why is Firmage working on anti-gravity stuff to get a thing a couple inches off the ground? Why is Tom DeLonge, why are they working on this? They're going to fire terrorists at this object, or this layered piece of metal, which will levitate the piece of metal. Why are we working on this if we've got all this technology? It would make more sense that Bigelow, who's got all the money, or Firmage, who's got all the money, they would just go and buy some of the black world technology. If it's already been done, why are they wasting their time spending all this money doing all this kind of stuff? Why is, why are we going to Mars? Why are we spending all this money to go to Mars and stuff if we've already got this sort of stuff? I can see that maybe they can do it in the black world, but why are these high-level people with all the money falling for this? I mean, you can say you and I don't know, but they know that they're working with government all the time. It doesn't make any sense. It would almost seem like if they had this technology, Bigelow wouldn't be working on this Mickey Mouse technology, and the same with Firmage, and the same with Elon Musk and all these guys. They would be going after the black world technology. They wouldn't be working on this simple anti-gravity type stuff.
Oh, interesting. So what do you think? So you think that they're kind of wasting their time, basically? Is that what your thoughts are?
Well, or that they don't have anything. That the whole thing about the secret space program is garbage. I asked Chris Bledsoe, because Chris Bledsoe was in the DeLonge camp. And he's also, if you know the story, Jim Semivan, who runs To the Stars, he's the CIA guy, is an experiencer. And he told Chris that when he was in the CIA, he knew Chris. He knew who Chris was. But he couldn't contact him until after he left the CIA. He goes to Tom DeLonge, and he said, I want you to take Chris's story. I want you to take it to Hollywood, and I want you to make it happen. So he's very close with Chris Bledsoe. So I said to Chris at one point, I said, okay, there's all this stuff about the secret space program. Ask him, do we have all these, secret spacecrafts that are flying all over the stuff, because it doesn't make any sense. Like you say, you and I would miss the point. and you and I would be, in the woods and not know what's going on. But can you really say that Bigelow didn't know, and that Firmage didn't know, and these guys, that Elon Musk didn't know, and that they're spending all this money and they didn't realize that this stuff's already been done? You would just cut to the black world and try to get the black world technology or learn something from the black world technology. So I'm going to write a paper that says perhaps we really don't know anything. Or if you have Eric Davis, if you heard the interview with Eric Davis, he does on Coast to Coast, and he says to him about the crash. And he said, well, if you're a betting guy, Roswell's probably a pretty good bet. He said, we had a crash saucer program and we shut it down in 1989. So when Eric Davis says that, you got to listen, because Eric Davis has got some clearances. Eric Davis is the guy who's doing the portal stuff. Was on the contract for the ATIP program. If Eric Davis says it, I pay attention. Now it may not be true, but I would believe Eric Davis. So when Eric Davis says they shut it down, and that was the whole thing with the Bob Lazar thing, where that was 1989. They shut it down there. That again would indicate that we really don't back engineer. And if you hear the stories, people will describe, they always think it's like nuts and bolts. When you talk to the people who've flown the ship, this ain't nuts and bolts. This is much more complex. You hear Chris. I have Chris, and I think I'm not sure if I have it on my YouTube channel, but I said to Chris, when I heard Chris had flown the ship, I said, Chris, you flown the ship? He said, yeah. I said, okay, don't say anything, Chris. I'm going to phone you on Skype. I want you to start from the beginning. I want you to go to the end. You tell me exactly how you fly a ship. When you hear how he flies a ship, you come to the craft. The craft looks like it's about 10 feet across. It looked like an egg or whatever. You look inside the craft and it's like 50 feet across. You look outside, it's 10 feet. You look inside, it's 50 feet across. Lots of experiences have shown this. This is not something I think we've developed. There's no way we've got this kind of technology. And then Chris tells, and they all say the same thing. You put your hand on, it's either on a pad, a ball. Chris called it a beehive on a pedestal. You put your hand, and he said these little hexagons, the whole room starts to change. These little hexagons start to spin, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and these hexagons are spinning, and everything's changing, and then suddenly the window opens up, and he can see he's above the Cape Fear River, and he's using his mind, and he's just flying along the edge of the river. I don't care what it is. We do not have that technology. We do not have technology where ships are changing shapes and stuff like this. You start looking and listening to the experiencers talk about this technology. This guy from Ron Johnson, he told me the story. He's flying this ship, and he said, they asked him, what would you like? What would you like? He said, I would like to see the Milky Way from a distance. And they said, okay, hang on. It's on the tape. It's on tape. They said, hang on. You're going to feel a great sort of a gravitational pull right at the very beginning. It's going to be very intense. He said it was 1 second of gravitational pull, 1 second of noise. I can't remember what the second thing was. In 2 seconds, he's suddenly in the middle of the universe looking at the Milky Way. 2 seconds. There's no way we have this technology. No way. I think it's almost like military bravado. Oh yeah, we've got this. We got we've got all Iraq is under control and Afghanistan, and almost like the president. We've got all jobs are good, everything's good. It's almost like this, putting this stuff out for some sort of disinformation thing. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the secret space program, but when I started looking at the stuff, and especially when you get Ron Pandolfi and you get Lundahl talking about it, and some of the papers I've recovered, absolutely, I would think that all the presidential libraries I've been to, all the documents that I've seen that have been leaked and stuff, sooner or later you'd run across a document from the Black Budget program that there's this tech. I have never seen. I've done documents for many decades. I've never seen a document that came. You'll have all these sort of leaked documents, or not even leaked documents, just statements. I have not. And so only in the last couple of years I'm starting to think, and I'm going to put it all together, all the evidence I've got going through the years, that when you go to the presidential library and you talk to these different people, I at sometimes don't think we have anything, that we are actually in the dark. And that, as Eric Davis said, we shut down the crash saucer program because we could not determine anything. We could not figure out anything. We could tell, yes, it's for real. Yes, we've got bodies and stuff like that. But it's almost like Wilbur Smith, who ran the Canadian government program, he said the same thing. There's no way you're going to be able to figure this out, even if you've got the craft.
Well, there's some people that have said in the past that they think that, fiber optics and things like that came from reverse engineering. I mean, speculation, of course. We've only got just, this time has flown by. I can't believe it. We're actually basically out of time, Grant.
There you go. Well, that was good. You got a few stories. You got something new, I think.
Yeah. That's great. Well, hey, thank you so much, Grant. It's always
Yeah,
a pleasure talking to you. That's pretty interesting. All
yeah.
right.
Okay.
All right. You
We'll
take
do it
care.
again sometime, and
Yeah.
keep on going. I listen to your interviews, especially when you do the To the Stars ones or John Alexander. Some people
Well,
may
thank
not
you.
be listening. I'm listening and I'm taking notes.
Hey, well, thank you very much. And also, anyone that's listening now on KGRA Radio, you're going to have another show with Grant Cameron coming up right after me. All right, Grant. You take care.
Beautiful. Good night.
All right. Good night. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thanks so much. And next week it should be in Austria if you're listening to this. And in that case, we'll have Jeremy Corbell will be coming up on the show, the first part of the show. And after that, hopefully, Eduardo from Vienna is going to join me. And it should be interesting anyway. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.